Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel and welcome to the first video of 2024. I nearly said 2023 because I'm still not used to it. What I wanted to do today was talk to you about all of the books that I rated 5 stars in 2023, the year just gone, and talk about them, recommend them a little bit, talk about why I personally think they are the best books that I read last year. So, before we get started, I do just want to say I am very stingy with giving books 5 stars. So I read, I think like 42, 43 books last year, and I only have 6 books to talk about. So I don't rate books 5 stars very often, not because I think they're not good books, but because my metric for whether something is 5 stars is very high. Basically, did I enjoy it as much as Six of Crows? If I did, then it's 5 stars. If I didn't, it's not. So that is how I work it out, essentially. So the first book that I want to talk about is The Mad Woman's Ball by Victoria Mass. I have briefly talked about this book on my channel before, in my I think it was top 3 books video that I did with Becky, where we both talked about our like favourite books of all time, and this book was in there. I honestly don't know if I filmed that video again now, if it would still be. It probably wouldn't be, honestly, but that doesn't mean it's not a good book, and it doesn't mean it doesn't deserve the 5 stars. So this is quite a short book, but quite a lot happens in it and a lot of emotions come out through it. Essentially, it's the sort of entwining stories of predominantly 2 different women in, I think it's like 1800s France, in an asylum specifically for women, most of the women in there being diagnosed with hysteria, some of them experiencing things like seizures or various different problems that obviously nowadays would be treated very differently. And one of the women, I don't remember either of their names, I'm really sorry. One of the women is a nurse in the hospital, and the other one ends up becoming a patient in the hospital. She ends up becoming a patient because she believes that she can see spirits and hear spirits, and that's sort of something that occurs to her throughout the book, and she becomes very interested in the spiritual and supernatural world. And obviously that wasn't something that was really seen as normal in that time, so she is sent off to, I can't remember the name of the asylum, and even if I did, I don't think I'd be able to pronounce it properly, so but she's sent off to this asylum, and through these 2 women we do also learn the stories and histories of lots of other women in the asylum as well. This book just brought up a lot of different emotions, and I said in a video recently, I like books that make me feel different things, and this one did. Even though it's really short, it made me feel happy, inspired in the way of like when women all come together in adverse situations and support each other, inspiring in that way. It made me feel sad. There was like a bittersweetness to it. It's not necessarily the happiest of stories, but it's not heartbreaking or difficult to read or anything like that. And for me, it just really had that feeling of those very feminine emotions of seeing how women used to be treated and comparing that to now, and partly some of that creating sadness, solidarity, many different things, and a little bit of anger as well. I think it just captured that experience really well. There is also some actual historic basis to it. I mean, obviously this was around the time that hysteria was very big. It was something that women were diagnosed with frequently when they were just seen as problems to society or their family, so they were just kind of forgotten about and pushed away. It also does include a doctor who really did do a lot of treatment on women, quite experimental in terms of for the time. He was using a lot of hypnosis and things like that. and lots of other doctors were studying from him the treatment of hysteria, and it covers a lot of him and his work as well, and how that then affected the women. I've looked into it a little bit after I read it, but I honestly don't know how much the portrayal of him as a doctor is actually historically accurate, but I really like historic books that take those stories that have traditionally just been told from the man's point of view and then sort of try and fill in those gaps of actually the women that affected, even if they're not the most accurate. I enjoy it. So I would really recommend this book. It's not very long, so it didn't take me long to get through. I think it was a little bit slow to begin with. It took me a little bit of time to get into it, but it's a quick read. It makes you feel things. What more could you want? Right, the next book is the only one that I don't actually have a physical copy of. So as always, I'll just put it over here. This is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I can never, off the top of my head, remember her name, nor ever know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So if I am pronouncing it incorrectly, please do let me know. But this is a series of books. There's 4 books in this series, but specifically I am just talking about the first one here. The rest of the books in the series are still good, but I think the first one was the best one. The first one was the only one I rated 5 stars. The rest of them still good, 4 stars. But today we're specifically talking about The Raven Boys, as in the book, not the whole series. So this is a very YA book, and it basically follows predominantly the story of a girl called Blue, who comes from a very eclectic and different family. Her family are all fortune tellers, clairvoyant, clairaudient, that sort of thing, and it doesn't seem like she has any sort of gift in that way, despite the fact that all of the women in the family seem to have inherited it. And she makes friends with this group of 4 boys from the upper class, middle class school down the road. One of the guys in the group, Gansey, he is just obsessed with finding the body of this dead Welsh king that he thinks is somewhere nearby where they live, and obsessed with the idea of magic being imbued into this king's resting place, and following ley lines and traveling to different places to do research. And the book is basically Blue and the boys trying to discover that, and going on various different adventures, discovering more about their different characters and personalities and backstories, and obviously that continues throughout the rest of the series as well. But this was a really, just a warm book. I don't really know how else to explain it, in that it had that kind of found family, chosen family vibes of this friendship group. It had shocks and twists that I did not see at all. There was one specific thing in this book that I don't remember the last time I was that shocked about a book, which I love. I love it when that happens, especially when you can go back and see hints or clues to certain things and be like, oh my god, I can't believe I missed that. So it just kept me in, it kept me hooked, even though I do wish I had read this when maybe I was a bit younger, because I feel like I would have enjoyed it more as a teenager or an older teen. But I still really enjoyed it when I read it last year. It was really good. The series in general is good, but the first one in particular will just get you hooked and get you sort of wanting to read the next few books too. So the next book is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I'm pretty sure I have already spoken about this in a wrap up, but I'm not sure my thoughts on it were the most coherent. So it's not really a surprise to me, and I don't think it should be a surprise to anyone that Leigh Bardugo is in this list of 5-star rated books from last year, because I haven't disliked any of her books that I've read. They've all been fantastic, and I am so excited for her next release. Ninth House basically follows Alex Stern throughout her time at Yale University. Alex has a very troubled background, didn't have the best upbringing. struggled with a lot of problems. No one really expected her to be able to go to a good university, and she manages to get there through a deal to help the sort of secret societies that are operating at the university. And then throughout her time there, she gets embroiled in the occult plots of these secret societies and crimes and trying to solve mysteries, and there's so much going on in it, but not in an overwhelming way. It's as with all of Lee's books, the characters are fantastic. If you want a book with a female main character that is just awesome and takes no shit and just gets shit done, but still has a complexity of emotions underneath that, this is the book for you. Alex very, very quickly became one of my favourite fictional characters ever. She's just fantastic, and also at certain points quite relatable. The other characters within the book are really good as well, as always, but Alex in particular is just such a standout, and which is good because she's the main character, so obviously you want her to be, like, you know, enjoyable to read. It has very dark academia vibes. There's the old college campus, autumn vibes and feelings, murder, magic, the occult. It's just a really good book. And the second in the series was also really good. It's not, again, it didn't quite hit how the first one hit for me, but there are also going to be more books in this series, so I'm very excited to see where the story goes. Would really recommend, if you're a fan of any of Lee's previous writing and you haven't read this yet, or just if you're in that dark academia mood, it's really good. The next book, which I feel like also quite often gets lumped in the dark academia realm, and I understand why, even though it's not really a dark academic book, is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I fucking love this book so much. I have also already talked about this in a wrap-up. I think it was the same wrap-up as Ninth House, actually. That was a good month for reading. My thoughts on this at the time were definitely very incoherent, and I'm going to apologise because they still kind of are. I don't know what drugs were put into this book, into this writing when Oscar Wilde wrote it, but I have never wanted to devour a book faster than this one. I read it, I'm pretty sure, all in one sitting, which, you know, it's not a very long book, but still. I just couldn't stop. It was so good, and I feel like the fact that I just couldn't stop reading it is very apt for the book that it is. So, Dorian Gray, in case you don't know, it essentially follows predominantly the story of Dorian Gray, our main character, although there are a sprinkling of other sort of semi-main characters in there as well. But basically Dorian is quite young, he's very attractive, he's in the, what's the phrase? He's in the peak of his youth, essentially. Young, attractive, decently well off, no real responsibilities or anything like that. And he gets his portrait painted by his friend Basil. Basil, who is very obviously secretly in love with Dorian. Basil is quite a quiet, quite a nervous, sort of sensitive guy, and it's just really been them that have known each other. But when Dorian is introduced to Basil's friend, Lord Wotton, he then starts to change. Lord Wotton is not the best influence and basically encourages Dorian to make the most of his youth, make the most of his beauty. It's not going to last forever. And Dorian carelessly makes a statement when this painting is done, this portrait is done, carelessly wishes that the portrait would age instead of him, and he would stay this young and youthful forever. And essentially that's what happens. And then the story follows Dorian's life not aging, staying looking young and healthy, and him just overindulging in abundance and trying to then reckon with the sins that are being displayed in this portrait that is aging instead of him. I said that this quite often gets like lumped in with dark academia themes, vibes, genre, whatever. It's not a dark academia book at all, but I do understand where that vibe and feeling comes from. It's very gothic, it's obviously a classic. It's basically a cautionary tale on the consequences of overindulgence, hedonism, excessiveness, and the impacts that that can then have on a person. This book left me thinking for days. The ending, I don't know how I didn't know the ending, but I didn't. And it just left me thinking, questioning, making sense of things. And again, I like books that can do that. I like books that leave me with something that I'm still analysing and trying to make sense of it for days afterwards. So I definitely need to reread this a bit slower because of how fast I read it the first time. But if you haven't read this classic, I think it's the main one that I would recommend to everyone. Mainly because of how easy I found it to read, of how poetic and beautiful Oscar Wilde's descriptions are of things, of how much I just generally love Oscar Wilde. I just think it's not, for me personally, it didn't feel like I was reading a classic when I was reading it. Like, quite often, yes, I have enjoyed a lot of the classics I've read, but they do feel like you have to put effort into reading them. This didn't feel like that. So it would be my first pick to recommend to people if they're wanting to read more classics or get into them more. The next book, as much as I could talk about it for ages, I'm not actually going to talk about it for that long because it's a memoir, which feels strange even rating a memoir, but it is And Away by Bob Mortimer, which, again, I have talked about before. I listened to this as an audiobook, which, if anyone is a fan of Bob Mortimer and wants to read this, I would really recommend listening to the audiobook as opposed to actually read. I mean, obviously you can actually read it, but listening to it as an audiobook just gave it a different and extra level of immersion of the experience. It was fantastic. If you don't know, Bob Mortimer is a well-known and well-loved comedian in the UK who has been in the comedy circuit for many years at this point. So it focuses on his experiences during childhood and sort of growing up and things that sort of happened to him. But it also focuses a lot on his experiences of getting into comedy and struggles he had with things like confidence and socialising, making friends, that sort of thing, which was just so relatable. And especially him being someone that I particularly admire and who I have basically adopted as my stand-in father. It was just so comforting to listen to this, honestly, and hear those experiences. As with Bob, there was also a lot of very funny moments, a lot of happy moments that, you know, where this is real life, there were sort of sadder moments as well. I would obviously mainly recommend this if you are a fan of Bob Mortimer. And if you are a fan of him, I would particularly recommend getting the audiobook so you can hear him narrating it. And just it just feels like you're sat down with him and he's just telling you some stories about his life. It's really nice. If you're not a fan of him, obviously you might not be that interested, but definitely one of my top books, definitely, that I read last year. Right, and then on to the last one. It is If We're Villains by ML Rio. I literally just talked about this in my final wrap-up of 2023, so I'm probably not going to talk about this one too much either. This essentially follows our main character, Oliver, who right at the beginning of the book, he's just been released from prison after serving a 10-year sentence. We don't know why he was there, but what we do know is that the police officer that was originally assigned to his case has doubts about what happened and clearly doesn't believe the story that Oliver gave that led to his conviction. And this police officer is now retiring and just wants the truth, not to do anything with it or to change what happened, but more so just for his own peace of mind in his retirement to figure that one out. It basically then follows Oliver recounting these stories of his time at university, where he was a drama student doing a very specific course that was just focused on Shakespeare with 6 other students, and it looks at their friendships, what's happened, and essentially what led up to this crime that resulted in Oliver being convicted and him explaining what happened. This was another book that I read in one sitting. I could not stop reading this as soon as I started, and this is another one that I need to reread because I read it so quickly. All I know is that it was amazing. The main thing that I can take away from it is that it made me really sad, which I don't think is a bad thing. I like sad stories. I like heartbreak and just thinking about characters and what happened to them or what could have happened to them and feeling sad. I really enjoy that for whatever reason. And this really fulfilled that for me. I, again, thought about this a lot after I finished reading it. I cried a lot when I finished reading it. I had been on the fence with reading this book for quite a long time because I knew it was like, in the dark academia world, there was like The Secret History, and then there was If We Were Villains, and you know, it was almost like these are the 2 books, and The Secret History was okay, but we all know my opinions on it. It was okay, but it wasn't great. It's not my favourite thing I've ever read, and I don't really seem to have the same love for it that a lot of people do. So I was quite concerned that If We Were Villains would be the same, and I wasn't really going to enjoy it that much. But it exceeded every expectation that I had. It was what I expected and wished The Secret History was, and it made me want to read Shakespeare plays, which I had never historically enjoyed. So, you know, that's a positive from it as well. If you're like wanting to get into that dark academia world, I would recommend this over any other of the frequently recommended books in that sphere. I would definitely recommend it over The Secret History. I think this is easier to read. It doesn't feel as long or as much of a slog to get through as The Secret History did. I think this has great characters that you genuinely care about, or I genuinely cared about anyway, and wanted to know more about and keep reading about. It was one of those books that immediately as soon as it finished, I was like, right, someone has to have written some fan fiction about this because I need more. One of those books where you just really wish it had been a little bit longer, but actually not in the way of things feel unfinished, just you don't want that story to be over yet. If you are anything like me who likes to collect sad, troubled, fictional male characters and just collect them, then you will like this book. I think the characters are the main selling point for me, but there's also that in true Shakespearean fashion, there's that pure tragedy of it, which I can't help but appreciate and enjoy, even though it was very sad and did make me cry a lot. It was fantastic. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna reread it at some point this year. So that is all of my 5-star books this year. Like I said, there's not a huge amount because I am quite stingy, but I think the ones there, I personally believe really deserve it. And I personally really enjoyed and would recommend every single one of them freely to anyone. They all deserve to be read. They all deserve love and the star rating that I gave them. I would be really interested to know your top books of the year and what you felt like were your favourite or, you know, best 5-star reads of the year. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope if there are any books here that you hadn't read or weren't sure on, that has helped convince you to read them. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and I will see you soon. Bye guys.